Thanks everybody for coming. I'm Dan Rundy. I'm Director of the Project on Prosperity and Development. I'm so pleased that you all have taken time out of your schedules to be with us today at CSIS. It's a real privilege to have Daniel Yohannes, who's the CEO of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Mr. Yohannes is really one of the stars of the Obama administration and is someone in my mind who is leading one of the most important innovations in international development, he and his team. The Millennium Challenge Corporation was started in 2004 and is an organization that has had a number of important accomplishments and is also a central part of how Africa is going through transformation. Before coming to the Millennium Challenge Corporation, Mr. Yohannes had a great career in banking in the United States for over 30 years. He was born in Ethiopia, so I'm going to, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over the floor to Mr. Yohannes. Please.
Thank you, Daniel, for those kind words and for your leadership of the Project on Prosperity and Development, and for your many years of service on behalf of global development. It is a pleasure to speak at CIS, an organization that has been influential in shaping the policies that help keep this country a force for good around the world. Together, the Project on Prosperity and Development and CSIS play a critical role in linking the private sector to the public sector. This has also been one of my primary goals at the Millennium Challenge Corporation. I know it's not easy, so I, for one, certainly appreciate your efforts. Our meeting here to discuss global poverty and private sector-led economic growth is extremely timely with next week's G8 Summit approaching. This is especially the case for Africa, which is home for more poor countries than any other continent in the world. The G8's long-standing partnership with Africa has been reflected in a variety of promises over the years, including canceling debt, fighting disease, and training peacekeepers. But the proof of genuine partnership is in action and results. And expectation will be high for both next week. Today, I want to speak to you about the critical role that partnership with the private sector will play in Africa's development, and about the Millennium Challenge Corporation's work and lessons learned in pursuing improved investment environments for the private sector in Africa. Last September, President Obama signed a presidential policy directive on global development, the first of its kind by a U.S. administration. The President knows that development is a strategic, economic, and moral imperative for the United States, and an indispensable pillar in the forward defense of America's interests in today's increasingly interdependent world. At the same time, in this era of budget constraints, we must be very careful as stewards of American tax dollars. We need to ensure that our development investments are as efficient and effective, and that they deliver meaningful and sustainable results. When we speak of strategic, cost-effective development investment, we're speaking about the Millennium Challenge Corporation. The Millennium Challenge Corporation was created in 2004, supported by Democrats and Republicans in Congress, with a very specific mission to reduce poverty through long-term economic growth. We are extremely selective, and our approach to development is like a business. We invest in projects that our partners prioritize, but those that are expected to get the best return for the American taxpayer. And when we talk about good return, we're talking about our investment ability to increase our partners' income. That's what makes MCC unique and different than any other development agency in the world. how we report results, how we monitor results. We have one major objective: to transition our partner countries to self-sufficiency from aid dependency and replace aid dollars with investments from the private sector. Of MCC's $8 billion investment, approximately two-thirds is committed to the continent of Africa, centered primarily in infrastructure, agriculture, and energy projects, key vital sectors to facilitate and trade-related activities. Helping Africans shore up their stability advances U.S. security interests, and helping them boost their prosperity also helps them become stronger trading partners for America. This is a case in doing good, we are also doing well. So that leads us to a critical question. How do we achieve our goal of raising incomes in a sustainable way? The key is removing constraints to private sector-led economic growth. We know from experience that the private sector is the most dynamic engine of development, job creation, innovation, and productivity increases. So in our investment decisions in Africa and around the world, we are concentrated in engaging the private sector at every level of our operations. We are also helping our partner countries forge partnership and constructive engagement with the private sector to enhance the impact of our investments and to sustain it after our funding ends. The private sector has a clear interest in investing in Africa's development, particularly with MCC countries. The countries that we work with are poor, but well-governed, and are poised to become the next emerging markets. Let us consider some facts. Between 2000 and 2008, GDP per capita in Sub-Saharan Africa grew by 54%. The number of African households with discretionary income is expected to rise by 50% in the next decade. While we know that private sector investment is key, we must not deny that doing business in developing countries could be risky and very difficult. That's why a critical part of MCC's work is helping overcome these barriers through education and training programs, support for business-friendly policy reform, and infrastructure improvements. For example, landlocked African countries simply cannot trade if they do not have decent roads, bridges, or airports to move their goods. For that reason, the majority of our African partner countries are investing their MCC grants in infrastructure and energy-related activities, removing the constraints to growth, making themselves extremely attractive places for private sector investments. They can't trade if they don't have good infrastructure. At MCC, we are proud of what we have achieved so far in strengthening our partner countries for private investment. This work has not been easy and has not been without some difficulties. But we are learning important lessons along the way about how best to align the interests of government and those of private sector. Let me talk about a few of those lessons. First, it is essential that both sides clearly understand the needs and priorities of the other. For example, in countries like Liberia and Benin, MCC has facilitated the negotiation of reasonable tariff reform, reassuring business while helping governments see the value in simplified and harmonized regimes. Second, in order to successfully engage the private sector and other stakeholders, all parties must be formally included early on program design and development with their roles clearly defined. Third, businesses are reassured by MCC's ability to fully commit funds up front, and secure government commitments to implementation. We have seen businesses more readily invest or participate in procurements because they have greater faith in the resources and follow through of the projects. Fourth, broad economic growth is best achieved if we can find ways to attract local investment in homegrown innovations that are geared to solve local problems. MCC actively encourages these domestic and regional investments. And finally, policy reform at both the macro and sectoral levels is crucial in attracting sustainable private sector investments. MCC's principle of selectivity also creates a very powerful incentive for good governance both in countries we work with and those that want to be our partners. And more importantly, the African need to reduce trade barriers within Africa. I am proud that President Obama has made effective global development a priority. His development strategy builds on the principles that MCC has been put into practice over the last 7 years. It also gives MCC a key role in pushing boundaries of effective, innovative foreign aid. However, long-term success is impossible without the private sector. As we look to the future, I want MCC to expand our range of private sector partnerships. We will continue working closely with businesses to encourage productive investments alongside MCC investments, and will continue to ensure that every U.S. taxpayer dollar will invest yield the most significant return. MCC is helping Africans save the world. We are open for business by motivating the right policies, building infrastructure, and deepening capacity for trade and investment. And MCC is doing this alongside Africans themselves. The continent has made great strides in recent years, but there is much left to do. Together, we must find innovative ways to leverage aid to reduce poverty, promote growth, and attract private sector. We must chase opportunity for the betterment of Africa's citizens in the best interest of the world that we share. At the G8, leaders will renew their commitment to a partnership with Africa. Let us make that partnership real. That is our commitment every day at MCC. And I look forward to continuing this important work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johannes. I know that many in the audience will completely agree that the most dynamic engine of development is the private sector, and I think that what you're doing at MCC is catalyzing private sector investment. We were talking earlier about the Mcc Effect. Many of you have heard of the Mcc Effect, and I thought that maybe I'd ask you a few questions about the impact of the MCC. In a variety of ways, but one of them is about the Mcc Effect. Could you just share a little bit about that? You were telling me about a couple of countries where that's happened, and you alluded to it in your remarks. Just push the button there.
Thank you very much, Dan. The MCC impact is real big. I mean, I was telling Dan earlier that I've had many conversations since the last couple of months from leaders who want to be considered for our program because they could see the benefits. And of course, even though they are not currently eligible for the program, but the fact of the matter is, as long as they continue to make some improvements in both in improving the governance and building the infrastructure that's required, I told them that even if they do not get the fund from the Millennium Challenge Corporation, that they'll continue to attract investment from other sources because it's real. And we've seen it with countries that we have selected, and because we know our model of selectivity works, As you know, Dan, we work with countries that are committed for good governance, countries that are committed to their people. Our approach to aid is that aid is more effective when you work with countries that are committed to their people. So we've seen the model works, and this has also been a major incentive for others that want to be considered for a program, because we only work with 22 countries around the world out of 100 plus.
And we were also talking earlier about country ownership and how that's evolved over time. Can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking about country ownership now? Obviously, that's obviously an important part of what makes the MCC different.
We have no sector requirements, and we have no earmarks. Once countries are selected eligible for a program, the countries themselves are responsible for identifying the constraint to economic growth through a thorough consultation processes with their constituencies, businesses, NGOs, governments, and many others. They are also responsible for designing and developing the program, and they are also responsible for the implementation of the projects. We only have 2 people on the ground, so these are projects that are identified by them, and we only fund those projects that are expected to have the best return for the American taxpayers, and those projects that would have the most impact for our partners' countries. Again, when we talk about impact, we measure our impact primarily based on the investment ability to generate additional income for our partner countries. And let me tell you, Dan, a very powerful story. Anybody from Honduras in this room? Good, all right, well, I'm sorry nobody's here, but let me tell you a very successful story. In fact, David, who was sitting down there, was with me in Honduras. David worked with the State Department. Honduras was the first country to have completed our program. And our compact survived 3 different presidential administrations, a major political crisis, but it was completed on time and on budget. Reason being is that it was not owned by a particular president or prime minister. It was collectively owned by the people. Those people monitored the progress of our projects almost on a daily basis to make sure that it was being completed. And Ghana, for example, where we have another compact, the current administration is different than when we signed the first compact. The same thing in El Salvador. As a matter of fact, we got 8 countries where we have a new administration after we sign the compact. But ladies and gentlemen, since it's built based on their priorities, the support is just phenomenal. They don't look at it as the project of another president. It is in their national interest. So it's a very powerful tool when you deal with development field.
Can you talk a little bit about, you referenced it in your remarks about this era of resource constraints and budget austerity. Obviously, it's having an effect in terms of how MCC is making prioritizations. And could you just talk a little bit about how you're thinking about this?
What the constraints are real. For those of you that work for U.S. government, you see it. It's a reflection of the current status, and what that means is that we are committed to make sure that we are using taxpayers' resources effectively and efficiently. And number one, for MCC, we must continue to work with, poor countries, but those that are well governed, countries that are poised to become the next set of emerging economies, and those are countries that will, facilitate trade and investment-related opportunities for the U.S. And we must continue to work with those countries, invest in those projects that are expected to have the best return for the American taxpayer. Now, we must also continue to be innovative. We should be able to leverage every single dime we invest with partnering with the private sector, NGOs, and other development agencies. The idea is, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that every single dime is leveraged, and then the taxpayers are getting the most return from the investment. And that's how we're trying to solve some of the issues of the budget problems that we have, Dan.
How about on the issue of on partnerships? You have a very successful and interesting partnership with the World Food Program. Could you talk a little bit about how that came about, how that came about, and some of the results of that?
Okay. Almost in every project, we try to partner with somebody to try to leverage our investments. And in Ghana, we signed an MOU with the World Food Program, which is a very successful story. Last year, the World Food Program acquired about 1 million metric tons of maize from the Millennium Challenge Corporation trained farmers, worth about $350,000. That is, for the first time, the Ghanaians have become self-sufficient in the selling excess crops to the outside market to be distributed. That program was so successful, we've included other countries like Senegal, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Mozambique to the program. And also, speaking of partnership, we just signed a new compact last year with Jordan. And it is a $265 million compact, and our compacts can be leveraged by investment from the private sector for about $85 million. In Ghana, we also teamed up with Standard Bank, in which we both are providing a $20 million line of credit for farmers that are involved in commercial farming. So we are using every opportunity we have to leverage others to make sure that our investment is getting the best return for the American taxpayers.
Can you just talk a little bit more about Africa? You mentioned about the significant investment that MCC has in the region, and 50% of your portfolio is there in terms of by compact. Obviously, by resources, it's even more. I think what you're doing with Standard Bank is very important, and I think is the sort of leveraging, catalyzing and leveraging private lending capital is going to be a big part of what we should be doing as development actors going forward. Can you just talk about where you're seeing progress more broadly in Africa? Obviously, you made reference to it. It's some of the broader macro statistics, but some of the other countries where you have compacts and some of the progress that you're seeing from the investments.
Okay. I think we're working with about 11 countries in Africa. About 50% in numbers, about 75% in dollars are in Africa. Most of our African partners have decided to invest their funds in building infrastructure, roads, bridges, like in Mali's case, landlocked country in West Africa. They decided to spend significant amount of the dollars to invest in improving their international airport in Bamako. Benin and Cape Verde, they are using their MCC funds in investing in expanding their ports. In fact, I was in Cape Verde last year to see the newly completed port. It's absolutely beautiful. And in Benin, a country that will complete its compact in September, is another beautiful story to it, that in addition to our investments, a French company has decided to invest about $130 million to expand the port further, and they should be able to get additional $30 million per year from these investments. And this port in Benin is going to be able to solve some of the congestion problems, not only for Benin, and also primarily for Nigeria, which has one of the worst congested ports in that part of the world. And in Tanzania, for example, where we have invested about $700 million, the Tanzanians have decided to use a portion of the funds to build a major road that will link to Mombasa, and this will also provide business opportunities not only for Tanzania and Kenya, but also for the whole region. So our investments are helping our partner countries, but also helping the region create investment opportunities for the private sector.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the policy reforms that you've helped bring about? I think there were some examples about Cape Verde reducing the number of steps, but I know there are others as well, and I think it reflects I think it's also reflected in this MCC effect that we were talking about earlier, where people want to make the policy reforms so that they're rewarded both with MCC but also with private sector investment. And I think it oftentimes is the most consequential of these policy reforms. You could talk about that.
Yeah. Of course, Cape Verde is a very successful story, and I talk about that story almost daily basis. In fact, I just found out yesterday that I spoke to the diaspora group, and I was encouraging the group to consider making investments in their home countries because they understand their home countries better than anybody else. But in Cape Verde, what used to take about 67 days to get a license for new business, now you could get it in less than 1 hour. I mean, this is a result of our partnership. And I found out that one of the diaspora members made a significant investment, particularly in the transportation area. He took a couple of ferries from here that will be transporting passengers from one island to another island, which is a great business for tourism. So that's one success story. But, for example, we just signed a compact with Malawi for $350 million. As you know, Malawi is probably, less than 5% or 6% of the population have access to electricity. And even at that, you probably get electricity maybe 2 to 3 hours, so 4 hours a day, and the rest is out. So, our compact is going to help that country really make them energy secure. But in the meantime, we have negotiated for major policy reform. Literally from the kind of board structure they're going to have, who they're going to have, and in addition, some of the changes that have been projected would open up opportunities for investment from the private sector in case they want to make some additional investment or if they decide to make it private. And that had been the case with almost every investment we've made in Africa or other places was in the mind of major policy reforms. Dan, I'll give you another successful story in Honduras. Previously, if you want to get a loan from the bank, unless you own a real estate transaction or real estate property, you were not allowed to get a loan because that was it, all right? So working with them, they passed a new law, and now you could get a loan if you have a truck or cars or bicycles or crops, which opens up many opportunities for others who may not have access to capital. This is the kind of major policy reform that we are seeing. Every time we build a road, we don't do it unless they set aside additional road maintenance fee because we want to make sure that those roads are sustainable for many, many years to come. So they're all complemented with some kind of policy reform, some sectorial, some major policy from a macro perspective. They all have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 policy reform associated with it because in the long term, the idea is we want to make sure that the private sector follows after our investment. That's the only way you could bring about long-term economic sustainability.
You've closed a couple compacts last year. You're going to be closing it. You're slated to close a number this year. Obviously, there's a subset of folks that would like a second compact. My assumption is it's not a guaranteed thing. If you're a country and you want a second compact, how are you having those? What are those conversations like, and what are the criteria you're using? If you could just talk about that, I can imagine those are very interesting conversations.
Thank you, Dan. Number one, our presence in many of these countries is not open-ended. We don't plan to stay in these countries for a long time. Our objective is to put them on a path to become self-sufficient, to replace $8 with investment dollar from the private sector. So that's very clear. And out of the 7 countries that would have completed their compact this year, only 3 are currently eligible for a second compact. It's Ghana, it's Cape Verde, it's Georgia. And even if our approach with the second compact is very clear, we're looking in terms of what are the constraints for businesses in those countries. We want to be able to use the best available science technology to be able to push those countries much higher, much faster, and be able to eliminate poverty much faster than what we've done in the past. In the past, in the first 5 years, many of those countries use their funds to invest on infrastructure, like in Georgia. I was there about 3 or 4 months ago. They have done a great job. They built a 220-kilometer highway that links Tbilisi with Armenia and Turkey. They use a portion of the fund to help small business entrepreneurs, which I was extremely pleased, and it is a very successful program. I spent about my time with a dozen of the small business owners. I remember I went to this dairy farm. It's a brand new dairy farm in which we participated in assisting the owner. And that dairy farmer today is the processing center. She is employing about 25 people and supporting about 300 dairy farmers in the region. So, I could tell you the same story whether in Honduras or in Georgia and so forth. So not every country is going to be able to get a second compact. We'll look in terms of what has been accomplished in the first compact, whether the country achieved the objective or not. Also, how well are they doing in terms of policy reform? So the requirement is very stringent in second compact versus first compact. But with a number of those countries, for example, Cape Verde, Georgia, and Ghana, this probably could be the last time they're going to be able to see any kind of money from MCC because they are in a path to replace $8 with investment dollars. In Georgia, for example, they were ranked 120th place last year by the World Bank for ease of doing business. Today, Georgia is ranked number 12. A tremendous improvement. They have done more than any other country in the world to fight corruption. In fact, the Prime Minister told me just in one day, they eliminated 18,000 police officers. They said, you're out, all right? And of course, they have to hire some of them back, but if you know, it is very difficult to be corrupt in Georgia today.
So you've had a number of many successes. You've also had a couple of countries where there's been a disruption of some kind. I'm thinking about Madagascar. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about where you've had to make the difficult decision about terminating a compact before the end of a compact? And obviously, it's not something no one wants to have happen, yeah, but it's obviously something that happens from time to time.
Yeah. You know, one of our motto is, at times you have to make the tough decisions. And when countries do not abide by the same principles that they signed in, then we had no choice but to terminate, suspend, or put the funds on hold. In Madagascar, they had a coup d'etat, which is contrary to the principles in which they agreed. So we had no choice but to terminate the country. And in Armenia, after the problematic elections of 2007, 2008, we had to put some of the funds on hold and just complete the project that were previously committed. So, I mean, as hard, as difficult it is, a lot of times we're making the tough decisions of terminating, suspending, or holding the funds when countries do not abide by the principles, because you don't want to give them another green light. They, okay, continue business as usual, and that's not the kind of message you want to send to our partners. If they don't do it well, then, we're going to be out. And that's what we've done on those cases, Dan.
Okay, we're going to open it up to the audience. I know we've got some microphones here, and I suspect we're going to have any number of different questions. So I'm going to ask folks, I'll call on you if you will identify your name and the organization you're with, and also to keep your question brief and in the form of a question. So I'm going to go with this woman here, and then we'll go with the gentleman there. Start with those two, and we'll bunch these questions together, and then we'll have another round. Yes, please.
Thanks. I'm Rebecca Regan-Sachs from DAI Development Alternatives. I was curious, how does MCC compete with an entity like, say, China that can invest billions of dollars and often has no good governance criteria and sometimes contributes to corruption?
Okay, we'll get another question from the gentleman there.
Okay.
Hi, I'm John Glenn with the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. It's interesting that you come in the week before the G8 summit. What do you expect to come from those meetings vis-a-vis Africa and the work that will shape yours at the MCC?
So, question on China and versus compared to the MCC, and then in the context of the G8.
Okay. I think in China, they have their own interest. They're there. We see them, all over Africa in particular. And, they have a business interest, so that's why they don't care about many of the issues that we care. Now, even small things, when we build a road, we don't do it unless the country is committed to set aside some big road maintenance fee to be able to maintain those roads even after we leave the country. But I think what mattered the most is the kind of policy reforms that are being made as a result of our partnership are those that are going to create a tremendous incentive for many of those countries to attract businesses, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much money we spend, it doesn't matter how much money the Chinese spend, it doesn't matter how much money the countries themselves spend. What mattered the most is businesses, investment from the private sector, and that's what's going to make our investment more sustainable in the long term. So if they don't make any kind of changes to their policies, whether it be sectorial or a macro level, so it doesn't matter how much money comes from outside, it's not going to be able to make any significant changes. You see some short-term results, but I think the long term, you have to be able to attract businesses both within the country as well as from outside. So otherwise, I've seen those countries that are still dependent on foreign aid after 50 years, even though they're getting some investment from Chinese and other places. So I think the key becomes, again, is what are we doing to create the environment, the conditions ripe for investment from the private sector? That's the key. That's what makes a difference in terms of our approach versus the Chinese.
The other question was on the G8.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen in G8. I mean, definitely this is, you know, we're working in a very constrained business environment, budget environment, so I don't know what's going to be committed. But nevertheless, we know that Africa continues to grow, and also there still remains a lot of challenges in the continent. We've seen a lot of uprising, unprecedented uprising in the Middle East and Northern Africa. But I can't tell you what's going to be committed or expected to come next week, but I'm sure they're going to be talking about the same issues that they've talked about last year as well, how they're going to be renewing their commitment to Africa and others.
Okay, another set of questions. There's the gentleman up here in the front row and the lady here in the front row as well. Yeah. We'll bunch them together.
Jones, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We just came from a visit to Lesotho to our sister Minister of Health. And it was quite impressive to see that a significant portion of their compact had been used to develop infrastructure in health. The biggest constraints to scaling up a lot of the programs we've invested in, and we've invested heavily, as you know, has been is the infrastructure. Are there constraints in your policy or the criteria you've set that has made it difficult for other countries to do the same? Because as far as I know, Lesotho is about the first one that has had this sort of significant investment in infrastructure for health.
Okay. And the lady up front here.
Cool.
Janet McGilligan, the co-chair of the Royal Foundation to Rebuild Africa. I'd like you to just sort of expound a bit on what you mean by good governance. I see where you have Kenya and you've got Uganda that have compacts or I'm not sure if you call them quite compacts.
They have no compacts.
Yeah, but there's a president in Uganda who changed the constitution so that he could continue running. There were the riots in Kenya that resulted in split decisions. And then you've got Rwanda, which 50% of their budget is foreign aid. How do you expect the Millennium dollars to change basically what's happening in Rwanda so that their budget becomes self-sufficient on them as opposed to foreign aid? And why did you give money to countries like that when you didn't give it to other post-conflict countries?
Let me just also let's get a third question. I see a number of other hands. The gentleman back there.
DDA Trin with the Modernizing Foreign Assistance Network. Thank you, Mr. Yohannes, for being here. You mentioned the President's new, well, not as new global development policy that was released last fall. I'm interested to hear how you're collaborating with other development agencies like USAID to bring some coherence to our policy approach around the world.
Okay. Good.
Okay, so let me answer with this question first. We are continuing to provide lessons learned both to the administration and other development agencies about what we learned the last 7 years. In fact, today both MCC and USAID are working together doing joint constraint analysis for countries that have been selected for the I'm not sure what the word is, enhanced engagement, but partnership for growth. Okay, there are 4 countries. It's Tanzania, Philippines, El Salvador, and Ghana. So we are applying the same methods, the same constraint analysis that have been used by the Millennium Challenge Corporation to determine what the needs might be. So this is the first opportunities in which we are both working together. So I'm sure we have complemented each other's programs in the past, but this is a real opportunity for us. The first one after the President's new global development policy was discussed. So we are looking for the results forward. In terms of Lesotho, Uganda, Rwanda, we do not have a compact. Some of those countries had an earlier threshold program that was designed to address some specific needs before they could become eligible for first compact. And as you could see, that none of them have passed the test, and that's why they're not part of the MCC family today. And if, in fact, in the future they continue to make improvement and pass in those areas that is very critical to us, there's no reason why they should not be able to qualify. But today, unfortunately, they don't qualify for our program.
Now, Lesotho on the health infrastructure.
Yeah, Lesotho, they chose the funds. They made a decision to invest the dollars primarily in infrastructure and primarily also in the health sector, where we are working very closely with PEPFAR. And let me tell you another major story about Lesotho. Before, it was extremely difficult. This is not about a major policy reform. If you are a woman, and if you wanted to do a binding business transaction, you'd have had to get a signature from your husband or from a male in your family, all right? That was the case. But in order for Lesotho to be eligible for our program, they make some significant changes. Today, the woman has an equal opportunity as the man to sign business transactions. They don't have to wait for their husbands or their, another male party. They could do it themselves. So that's a major change in Lesotho's law as it relates to women.
Okay, another set of questions. I know there's a gentleman over there, and then I'm going to have one of my friend in the front row. Andrew.
I'm Jay Makransky. I'm an investment banker and head of the International Private Infrastructure Association. First of all, congratulations on the successes of the MCC program. But the real problem is that there is virtually no or little appetite for lending to Africa generally, and minimal appetite for investment, because at least for infrastructure projects, and we're talking about the $52 billion projects, investors aren't interested because there's no leverage, there's no international lending in Africa compared to the 90s, 90% of what it was. My question is, what is the MCC doing to address the credit enhancement issue in the form of possible loan guarantee programs, payment guarantee fund, which is something that the IPIA, our group, has been promoting, and other innovative approaches to really leverage the private sector by encouraging investment in infrastructure?
Okay, and then Andrew up front here.
Thanks, Dan. And thank you, Mr. Johannes, and for all the work that you're doing. My name is Andrew Mack from AM Global here in Washington. And my question is about technology. You have spoken at length about some of the building blocks of the traditional MCC program, infrastructure, agriculture, and energy. Increasingly, we have clients in the technology sectors that are interested in seeing if they can't play with MCC. And if the way that we look at it, it's a kind of a future infrastructure, if you will, especially for landlocked countries. Looking at Ghana, one of your star pupils, as an example, but island countries, landlocked countries also. So can you talk to us a little bit about how MCC impacts on the world of technology and what you're trying to do in future in that space? Thank you.
And now we'll just get this last question, this gentleman over here.
Mr. Madawa, Georgetown University. Two small questions. One is, you talked about the lessons learned, and were mostly of a positive nature. Are there lessons learned where things haven't actually worked, as opposed to things that have worked well? Yeah. Second, what are the Africans telling you about your program? What changes, if any, would they like to see you make?
Great. Okay. Great.
Okay.
I suspect this will be the last round of questions for the moment. So, yep.
Okay, a couple of things. Number one, do they like our program? They love our program. Everybody wants to be part of the Millennium Child Corporation, all right? Because we're also going to give you a transformative grant, because our grant on average are worth about $430 million, all right? And the only thing we ask is that we invest in those projects that are expected to give the best return. So I think, I speak to a lot of people, especially from Africa, and I'm constantly asked whether we're going to be able to invest in those countries or not. Now, what have we learned? We have learned a lot. I mean, when you deal with investment, investment is a risky business. Not every project is going to give you the desired results. And we know that. And, I spent about 30 years in the investment field, and I know for sure, one project, another country in the next couple of months and the next couple of years is going to give us results that may not be to what we like, but nevertheless, we're going to learn from it, we're going to post it, we're going to be transparent about it, and that's the risk. And so, as more countries complete their program, I think we'll learn from it. Now, in terms of the first question, I believe, the credit, what are we going to do about it? I mean, until now, most of the projects have been primarily committed, and there were, one of the models about MCC is that the countries themselves decide what they want to do. So for those projects that have already been baked, there's not much to do. But we're asking for countries that are becoming eligible for second compacts, like Ghana and Cape Verde and Georgia, particularly Indonesia. We're working with the first compact. We're looking for ways how we could include those kind of investment opportunities that exist to make sure that they take advantage of it. And that's what we're doing. In addition, we just created another program called Invitation to Innovate, where we're seeking opportunities or ideas and how we could leverage our resources, whether it be using science and technology, whether it's a new approach to development. But it's posted so to the extent that any of you have any suggestions how we could run our businesses much better, or if you have any other technologies that could be used, please talk to us, and we'll be more than happy to work with you.
Sorry, is that on the website?
It's on the website, Invitation to Innovate.
In fact, we submitted a proposal under that program.
Great. Okay. But again, I'll be more than happy to work with you. Like I said, on a daily basis, I'm looking for new ideas, because one of the beauty about MCC is we continue to be innovative, and that's the only way you can stay relevant in this business. Otherwise, you can become very stagnant, and you'll be out of business. So on a daily basis, we're thinking, what could we do different today? Since our approach to development is like a business, I come from a business where every day you have to change and innovate. No different here at MCC. So new ideas, great. Some could use it. If we can't, then we'll try to find others could use it. But the idea is to leverage it.
Can you talk about the technology?
Okay. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. The question was, the programs that you have have been historically more focused on traditional infrastructure.
Correct.
Ports, roads, and what we're thinking about is the next infrastructure, which is all around technology, bringing in new technology and technology jobs. So
Yeah.
where's the future for MCC in that space?
I think, that's what we encourage our partner countries. In fact, we had a meeting with the President and the Prime Minister of Georgia, and the conversation came from about second compacts, and I made it very clear that we are more interested in second compact as something different in the area of technology, on science, that could bring about prosperity much faster than building roads and bridges, because that could be possible also from other sources. So I think we're making that message very clear, even though at the end of the day it's going to be their plan, because of the country ownership model, they're going to make a decision what they want to do. But we are making it very clear that we want to see something different than the first one.
Mr. House, this has been a real pleasure to have you at CSIS. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Please join me.